We're helping build a more compassionate future for all.
The honourable member from Kings Hants.
Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute and celebrate a great Canadian. Tomorrow, Sir Graham Day celebrates his 91st birthday. Graham is considered one of Canada's greatest corporate leaders and has contributed here at home and across the pond in the United Kingdom. He grew up in Halifax, and after graduating Dalhousie University with his law degree, he started practice in Windsor before being recruited to work with CP Railway and eventually headhunted to serve as the CEO of British Shipbuilders. Graham has advised two United Kingdom governments, including Margaret Thatcher's efforts to privatize major industrial assets in the 1980s. He served as the chairman and CEO for the Austin Rover Group, Cadbury Schweppes, and British Aerospace. He remains the last Canadian to be knighted. He is an inductee of the Canadian Business Hall of Fame, a recipient of the Order of Nova Scotia, and an officer of the Order of Canada. He is passionate about military service and was appointed the honorary colonel of the West Nova Scotia Regiment. Mr. Speaker, beyond all his accomplishments, he is a heck of a guy. Happy birthday, Graham, to him, his family, back home in Hantsport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well done.
The honourable member from Peterborough, Kawartha.
Absurd, asinine, foolish, bonkers, deranged. These are the synonyms for wacko, and they are exactly the correct adjectives to describe 9 years of this Prime Minister's policies and behaviours. Hiking the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre is wacko. Letting people smoke meth next to kids in parks is wacko. Creating censorship laws that Margaret Atwood calls creeping totalitarianism is wacko. 2 million people accessing a food bank a month in Canada is wacko. Repeat violent offenders walking free and terrorizing communities is wacko. Tent cities being the norm.
Don't mean to interrupt the honourable member from Peterborough, Kawartha, but I understand that there's no translation. Il y a pas de traduction.
There was no translation.
Alors, is there a translation available now? I'm going to ask the honourable member from Peterborough, Kawartha to start her statement again, and the chair was distracted for a second. I hope that the honourable member will make sure that her standing order statement will not refer to an individual member. Can talk to a pot of policy, but not a member. So the honourable member from Peterborough, Kawartha to start from the top.
Absurd, asinine, foolish, bonkers, deranged. These are the synonyms for wacko, and they are exactly the adjectives that describe 9 years of this Prime Minister's policies and behaviour. Hiking the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre is wacko. Letting people smoke meth next to kids in parks is wacko. Creating censorship laws that Margaret Atwood calls creeping totalitarianism is wacko. 2 million people accessing a food bank a month in Canada is wacko. Repeat violent offenders walking free and terrorizing communities is wacko. Tent cities being the norm in Canada is wacko. You cannot manage reality if you do not acknowledge it. Wacko chaos is the reality after 9 years of this Prime Minister. He is dangerous, and Conservatives will fight every single day to restore public safety, to restore affordability, and to restore...
The honourable member from Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, CHOQ-FM is Toronto's only French-language community radio station. It's located in my riding of Davenport, and it has been serving Francophones for 18 years, sharing their history, sharing the news, and helping build a strong Francophone community in our city and in our country. HoC FM provides significant visibility for Francophone businesses, organizations, and individuals in the Greater Toronto Area, both on the air and through its social media accounts. For these reasons and many more, I'm extremely proud to pay tribute to HoC FM for all it does to support and develop vibrant Francophone communities all across Canada. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Let's pay tribute today to an exceptional woman who, despite her preference for working in the shadows, shines in her community. This positive, energetic woman reassures, organizes, and motivates. This woman is Diane Charette, involved in her community since she was 15. She has successively energized the territories of Saint-Édouard-de-Masquinongé, Yamachiche, and Sainte-Ursule. Whether through the Optimist Club, the Youth Ball Club, or FADOC, her second family, this great lady has always been a real driving force with a contagious enthusiasm for her work. And what can we say about her legendary soup? Always available to warm hearts. This devoted and ever-present mother is also an outstanding administrator. Throughout her involvement, she has always had a contagious smile, a welcoming warmth, and a unifying spirit that delights everyone. Diane, for everything you are, I say bravo and thank you. The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to mark the departure of Daniel Boucher, Executive Director of the Société de la Francophonie Manitobaine, who's retiring after dedicating his life to his work. Elected Executive Director in the midst of a language crisis, Manitoba's Francophone community experienced a transformative period under his tenure. Under his leadership in 1994, the SFM celebrated the development of the first Francophone school division. In 1994. It was a major breakthrough that changed the game for Franco-Manitobans. In 2016, Danielle played a crucial role in the adoption of Bill 5, an inclusive law that ensured the long-term vitality of Manitoba's francophonie. And strengthened by these developments, the Francophone population in Manitoba has seen impressive growth from 11,000 Manitobans who spoke French in 1991 to 112,000 in 2021. His influence is enduring. Thank you for everything you've done, Danielle.
Honourable Member from Mission Matsqui, Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, Sunday, May 5th is Dutch Heritage Day in Canada and Liberation Day in the Netherlands. It is a time for Canada to honour the sacrifices made by our veterans who played an integral role in the liberation of the Netherlands from Nazi Germany in 1945. Battles of the Scheldt and the liberation of Arnhem were instrumental in freeing the Dutch from occupation. After World War II, hundreds of thousands of people made Canada their home, contributing to all aspects of Canadian society. There are now over 1 million Canadians of Dutch descent who trace their history to these integral events, which shape not only Canadian but Dutch identity alike. As co-chair of the Canada-Netherlands Parliamentary Friendship Group, I am pleased to recognize Dutch Heritage Day, to thank our veterans, and to recognize the lasting and growing bonds between our nations. Fijne Bevrijdingsdag, happy Dutch Heritage Day. Here, here.
The Honourable Member for Vimy. Mr. Speaker, on March 21st, the Table de Concertation de Laval en Conditions Féminines celebrated its 35th anniversary. Since its creation, the TCLCF, which is located in Vimy, has worked to collectively defend women's rights and improve our quality of life while representing more than 30,000 Laval women. Over the years, the organization's orientation has developed while adapting to political, economic, and social issues, as well as the emerging challenges facing women. Through education, awareness raising, and community mobilization, these struggles against systemic discrimination continue. Thank you to the Board of Directors, chaired by Audrey Leclerc, and to the entire team, coordinated by Marie-Ève Surprenant, and to all our members for your involvement and engagement in a more equitable and inclusive society. Happy 35th anniversary.
From Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, Richmond Hill has gone international. On Friday, April 26, 2024, Richmond Hill made history by welcoming the new headquarters of the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health to our community. We celebrated this milestone with Minister of International Development, Ambassador Bugaleskis, Dr. Kaveh Madani, His Worship Mayor David West, the city and the UNU team, as well as many community members. The inauguration remarks followed by the signing of joint statement, the flag-raising ceremony, the ribbon cutting, and the insightful tour of the UN new headquarters in the City Hall, forever enshrining this event in the history of Richmond Hill. This once-in-a-lifetime opportunity will unite top minds from academia and government worldwide to tackle water, environment, and healthcare challenges. I can't envision a better location for their new campus offering world-class education for environmental sustainability, all made possible by the visionary leadership of Dr. Kaveh Madani and Mayor West. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Beauce.
The honourable member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, on June 6th, part of the world will come together to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Normandy landings. This moment of courage, sacrifice, and solidarity marked a decisive turning point in the history of World War II. More than 100,000 men, fearing for their lives, landed on this beach to face the enemy. Among them was the De la Chaudière Regiment, the only French-Canadian unit to take part in the landings. Last September, Lieutenant Colonel Bruno Gilbert became the regiment's 27th commanding officer. The St. George's native began his career with the regiment in 1986 as an infantryman, quickly rising through the ranks. After a detour through the 35th Canadian Brigade Group as a sergeant major and the honour of being made a member of the Order of Military Merit, he returned to the De la Chaudière Regiment. Mr. Gilbert also shares his passion for science with young people as a teacher at Cégep Beauce-Appalaches. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Gilbert on his appointment and his contribution to the community. I wish you every success in your new position and thank you for proudly representing Beauce.
Member from Avalon.
Speaker, being a coastal province, we know that the sea does give it and sadly does take it away. On April 21st, the first day of the lobster season in Lark Harbour, Newfoundland, Labrador, Trevor Childs, 44, and his nephew Nicholas Skinner, 28, set off to set their traps. On shore helping were Trevor's dad, his grandfather, and some others getting the traps ready to load aboard their boat for the young men to set. But the sea had another plan and swamped their boat. They perished in the cold waters. The small communities of Lark Harbour and York Harbour were in shock, but none more than their families. Trevor is leaving behind the love of his life, Joanna, and precious Carrie 9, Addison 6, and Reese 2. Nicholas leaves the love of his life, Martina, along with his mom, dad, siblings, and numerous other family members, friends, and the entire fishing community of our province. Both these young men loved the outdoors and all it offered. They were great contributors to their towns, always there to lend a hand. These tragedies impact everyone in small rural towns. In moments of loss, communities knit together to help the families heal and move on. Rest in peace, Trevor and Brody. Thank you.
The honourable member from Oxford.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal NDP government's soft-on-crime policies, crime, chaos and disorder have become the norm in our country. Thanks to Liberal bills C-75 and C-5, violent crime is up 40% and extortion is up 218%. Towns and suburbs that were once peaceful are now being terrorized by gangsters. Just this week, a 19-year-old connected to a string of extortions was charged for 3 separate shootings, including one where bullets hit a child's playroom. He was arrested, he was charged, he was let out on bail, and guess what? Now he's fled the country. Canadians have lost faith in our justice system, and despite the Prime Minister's inaction, extortion is a federal responsibility. The criminal code is federal. The RCMP responsible for catching these criminals is federal. And the catch and release bail policies are also federal. Only common sense Conservatives will stop the crime, stop the extortion, and bring home safe streets for all Canadians.
The honourable member for South Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On April 7th, we lost a proud British Columbian and a great Canadian. The Honourable John Allen Fraser served as the 32nd Speaker of this House from 1986 to 1994 and for 21 years as a Member of Parliament for Vancouver South. He was held in the highest regard by all who knew him. I and so many sought out his counsel on many public affairs. I was honoured to speak at his piping out ceremony from the Seaforth Highlanders during my tenure as Associate Minister of National Defence. I note that his bride of 59 years was Kate Finlay, not a family member, but the Wright clan. John was a UBC-trained lawyer, Minister of the Crown, and the first Speaker to be elected by secret ballot. He was a voracious reader with a keen sense of humor, an orator of note who loved the outdoors. As Chief Opposition Whip and on behalf of a grateful nation, I thank Speaker Fraser for his service to our province and to our country. My thoughts are with his friends and his 3 daughters, Sheena, Anna, and Mary, and their children as they mourn his loss. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for recognizing an extraordinary Canadian, John Allen Fraser. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Sherbrooke. May is Borderline Personality Disorder Awareness Month. BPD is a serious, complex mental health disorder stemming primarily from chronic dysregulation of the emotions. People suffering from BPD, nearly 2% of the population, have a very hard time controlling their emotions and tend to be sensitive and reactive. The Sash Bear Foundation is committed to raising awareness of BPD. Since its creation in 2012 by Lynn Curry and Mike Menu, who are now in Ottawa, this charitable organization has restored hope, taught skills, and offered community to more than 10,000 families seriously affected by the mental health problems of a loved one. Every year, the foundation organizes the Sash Bear Walk, which brings together hundreds of supporters to create an orange sea of support, reduce stigma, and raise awareness of this illness and our national mental health crisis. Visit sashbear.org to learn more about BPD and how to reduce stigma.
The honourable member from Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, teams from around the world are gathering in Calgary next week for the World Para-Hockey Championships, and I'm so pleased to share that the starting goalie for Team Canada is none other than Adam Kingsmill from my home community of Smithers, BC. Bravo. Despite losing his leg in a tragic lawnmower accident when he was just a toddler, Adam became an accomplished athlete, playing softball, racing motocross, and excelling at stand-up hockey, all with the incredible support of his parents, Bobby and Grange. In 2016, he caught the eye of Team Canada's coaches, who convinced him to try para-hockey or sledge hockey. And 5 years later, he brought home a silver medal from the World Championships in the Czech Republic. He followed that up just a year later with another silver, this time at the Paralympic Games in Beijing, China. Adam's indomitable spirit, his determination and achievement continue to inspire people across northern BC and across Canada. I hope my colleagues will join me in wishing him and his teammates the very best of luck at this year's World Championships. Go Canada, go Adam.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, one of my constituents has made it into the Guinness Book. Jenny Barret, who suffers from the rare genetic disorder osteogenesis imperfecta, completed her 10th wheelchair marathon in London 2 weeks ago. In doing so, she clocked the fastest marathon ever run by a woman in a wheelchair, 4 hours, 19 minutes, and 21 seconds. In doing so, she beat the 1983 record set by no less than an Olympian. Jenny may be battling brittle bone disease, but she also has nerves of steel. The woman who suffered 157 fractures in her life has never stopped training for some 20 years in her second home, the St. Hyacinthe Boxing Club, originally founded by her father Bernard. She's certainly not going to stop now. She's a model of unflagging determination who should inspire us all. Jenny, my dear friend, you're a source of pride to our region and to all of Quebec.
The honourable member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Canadians are way past their breaking point. It's so bad that the CEO of Food Banks Canada now says that food banks are becoming unsustainable. Canadian food bank usage is at a historic high, 2 million people per month. Food banks cannot meet this demand. For people that have not been forced to the food banks and still utilize their local grocery store, let's consider some facts from a new report by Canada's food professor. 60% of Canadians are so desperate that they are eating expired or spoiled food. 20% of households with the lowest incomes use over 20% of their disposable income just to buy food. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of short-sighted policies of this Liberal NDP government, families are sliding deeper and deeper into debt. This is not the Canada that I grew up in, and this is not the Canada that we want to raise our children in. Common sense Conservatives will rebuild our economy and bring home lower prices for all Canadians.
The honourable member from Mississauga East, Cooksville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this February 7th, we had a historic vote on my motion M75 in the House of Commons. Unanimously, all members of Parliament, spanning various political affiliations and regions of our country, resoundingly gave an unwavering support for declaring May as Polish Heritage Month and designating May 3rd as Polish Constitution Day in Canada. Today, on Polish National Flag Day, parliamentarians from Canada and Poland, the Polish Embassy, Ambassador Jelski, Consuls General, the Canadian Polish Congress, and the community at large came together to commemorate these milestones on Parliament Hill for the first ever Polish flag raising. As we recognize and celebrate Polish Heritage Month and May 3rd Constitution Day from coast to coast to coast, and with the Polish and Canadian flags flying proudly on Parliament Hill, I say dziękuję bardzo. Thank you so much to the entire Polish-Canadian community. Nedzia Polska, Nedzia Canada.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
When will the Prime Minister make it illegal to smoke crack in a hospital room? Just the date, please.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the province of BC made a request for a temporary pilot project. BC now has concerns about that project, which we share. We are now working together to address those concerns. Opioid addiction is a tragedy that has affected far too many Canadian families. We have to work together to solve it, not score cheap partisan points off the pain of Canadians. There are no pilot projects anywhere else in Canada.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Because of this government's decision, it is no longer illegal to smoke crack, meth, or shoot up heroin in public spaces in British Columbia like parks, hospitals, and public transit. The British Columbia government has now begged the Prime Minister to reverse this decision. So, simple question, when will the Prime Minister once again make it illegal to smoke crack in a hospital room? Just the date.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, we believe in working together with Canadians to solve our country's most pressing problems. That's why earlier this week I was in touch with Premier Eby, and I assured him that we share his concerns and we are working urgently together to address them. And let's remember, opioid addiction is a tragedy which is afflicting so many Canadian families. Let's work together to help them not score cheap partisan points.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Dangerous addictions are hurting Canadians. After this government's decision to change the law, overdose deaths shot up and drug-related crime went through the roof. Now, the British Columbia government is asking for the government to reverse their decision. It's a simple question. It's a simple decision to make. So one final time, Mr. Speaker. On what date will this government make it illegal to smoke crack in a hospital room? Just the date.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservative House Leader, I've actually been in touch with the Premier of BC about this truly pressing issue. And unlike the Conservatives, we are working collaboratively with the province of BC. We share their concerns, and we are working together to support public health and public safety. What we're not doing is fundraising off of the pain, death, and suffering of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Every day that this radical Prime Minister dithers on the deadly experiment of legalizing hard drugs is another day that people die. Currently 6 a day in British Columbia. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, Quebec is not immune to this crisis, which affects every part of Canada. I quote from the Journal de Montréal, "Crack use is exploding in Montreal and we'll be seeing more and more of it in public places." Will the Prime Minister put an end to his extremist experiment in legalizing hard drugs and say no to any expansion in Quebec? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Mr. Speaker, British Columbia has asked for a pilot project. British Columbia now has certain serious concerns that we share, and that is the reason for which we will be working urgently in close collaboration with the province to meet these concerns. Mr. Speaker, these are tragedies for families throughout Canada. We need to put partisanship aside when it comes to this kind of matter. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. It's not partisanship to talk about syringes on the floor, degrading scenes and outbursts a stone's throw from a school in Montreal. Now that we know that the radical experiment in legalizing hard drugs in British Columbia by the Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc Québécois, by the way, was catastrophic and deadly. The Bloquiste MP for Joliette said in this House, the hope is that this pilot project will pave the way. The MP for Rimouski said, we in the Bloc Québécois are deeply convinced that this is a step in the right direction. Quebec doesn't want this. Can the Prime Minister assure this House that he will not follow the radical advice of the Bloc Québécois? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Mr. Speaker, the opioid epidemic and addiction is a tragedy that we have to fight together by giving a priority to the health and safety of Canadians. But, Mr. Speaker, Conservatives are just saying that our policy is extremist and radical. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, what is extremist and radical? White supremacy policy. Misogyny is radical. And so it's time for the Conservatives to denounce those policies that are truly extremist and radical. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. La Presse reported today that CBC's management is planning a rapprochement between the English network and Radio-Canada. Radio-Canada is not in crisis. CBC is. A rapprochement necessarily comes with concessions, and these concessions will be made at the expense of Quebec culture and creators. It necessarily means taking away a bit of our cultural identity to assimilate it with that of English Canada. This is a dangerous, slippery slope. Can the Prime Minister reassure French-speaking Quebecers and Canadians that the government has absolutely no intention of merging CBC and Radio-Canada? The Honourable Deputy Minister, Prime Minister and the Minister for Finance. A big thank you for the question, first of all, because we fully share the concerns of all Canadians, especially the concerns of Quebecers when it comes to the French language, when it comes to Quebec culture. And I can assure all Canadians that French broadcasting will not be affected. That's a priority for us. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we have a proposal. Instead of bringing CBC and Radio-Canada closer together, we should make them independent of each other. CBC has its challenges. Radio-Canada has its own. The two have neither the same cultural identity, nor the same audience, nor the same corporate culture. These are two completely separate entities. But what CBC management is proposing, a management appointed by the Liberals, by the way, is to weaken Radio-Canada in order to strengthen CBC. In the long term, this means assimilating the French-language public broadcaster. Why not turn it into two completely separate Crown corporations? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Mr. Speaker, we share people's concerns with regards to the French language in Canada, and with regards to French culture, and with regards to Quebec culture in Canada. On this side of the House, we will always, always, always work as hard as we can to support the French language, Canadian and Quebec culture in French. We will always support Radio-Canada.
L'honorable député de Rosemont, la petite patrie.
The honourable member for Rosemont, la petite patrie. Mr. Speaker, another report, another failure. With this Minister for the Environment at the wheel, Canada is going to miss its GHG emissions targets. No wonder. Everyone will remember the Liberals' environmental legacy. The purchase of Trans Mountain, $34 billion of our money in one big pipe. And still, billions garroted just like that for the oil companies, gobbling up public money, polluting and destroying our climate. The Minister of the Environment should be proud. Can the Liberals take responsibility for once and stop pretending to be interested in the climate crisis? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Mr. Speaker, our government has done more in the fight against climate change than any federal government in the history of Canada. We've put a price on pollution. We have a massive industrial program to the tune of $93 billion to stimulate our green transition. We are and we should be proud of what we do, and we know that we can and will do more.
The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have been letting the ultra-rich off the hook for years. But thanks to the NDP's capital gains changes, the wealthiest will pay a little more. And the Conservative leader doesn't like this. Maybe that's why he's getting wined and dined tonight by Bay Street billionaires at a Cash for Access fundraiser. Like the Liberals, the Conservatives would rather hand out billions to wealthy CEOs than fund the services people really need. Why are the Liberals maintaining the Conservatives' corporate giveaways?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am really glad that the member opposite has raised an issue about which the Conservatives have been notably silent, and that is our increase in the inclusion rate on capital gains. We agree with the member opposite that it is just not fair for a nurse or carpenter to pay tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire. But I agree with the member opposite. I think the Conservatives support that kind of unfair tax policy.
The honourable member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
The Liberal Minister for legalizing hard drugs is misleading Canadians. Yesterday, she told Canadians that Liberals were waiting for further information from British Columbia in response to BC's request to end this legalization experiment. Yet, just yesterday, the BC minister responsible told us that they had responded to the government in just a few hours. This, when BC had 2,500 overdoses in just 1 year. Why are the Liberals misleading Canadians, and will they end their radical drug policy?
The Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Mr. Speaker, the opioid crisis is affecting communities and families across this country, and it's a tragedy. That is why the BC government approached the federal government for a 3-year pilot program. BC communities are facing extremely serious challenges, and people are dying from deadly street drugs, and public consumption is a concern. BC is amending their proposal, and we are supporting them in this work, Mr. Speaker, because that's what we do. We partner together to save lives. What is their plan, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Well, they did partner together. They partnered together for a radical policy that has led to countless deaths. Imagine an elderly woman in hospital having to sit beside somebody, lay beside somebody who is smoking crystal meth.
The honourable member to start again. I'm hearing some voices from the far end of this room, which I cannot hear. And I'll ask the honourable member to start his question from the top. The honourable member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
The minister is correct. The Liberals have partnered with somebody. They partnered with the provincial NDP to create a crisis of unprecedented proportions that led to people dying due to their radical policy. After 9 years, this Liberal NDP government is flooding the market with free drugs. This is happening to our brothers, our sisters, our fathers, our mothers, our children. They are all being fueled with addiction of the free drugs. Will the Prime Minister reverse course and end his radical experiment of legalization?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we work with our provincial jurisdictions to ensure the health and safety of Canadians in the face of this toxic drug supply. We are treating this with urgency, Mr. Speaker, and all partners are working together to find a path forward as fast as possible to provide operational clarity for law enforcement, healthcare services, and all those who are involved in saving lives, Mr. Speaker. We want the same thing, public safety and access to public health care services for those who need it. They would cut everything. We are here to save lives.
John.
Before I pass the microphone again to the minister, for the honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country, I'm going to ask all members, please, to hold your comments until you're recognized to have the floor. The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal minister responsible for legal hard drugs in British Columbia isn't being straight with Canadians. Yesterday, she said she's waiting for more data from BC to decide if she would reverse her decision to legalize drugs like cocaine, opioids, and fentanyl in parks, playgrounds, and hospitals. The BC NDP confirmed yesterday they answered the Liberal government's request for more data within hours. Wow. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, drug deaths tragically rose 380%, as if that wasn't enough data. Why won't the Liberals be honest with Canadians and just end their radical drug policies?
That's a great question. The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we speak to our provincial counterparts and those who are the experts and with lived and living experience. The opposition, the member from Carleton, won't even meet with Mom Stop the Harm or other experts and those who are advocating for their families and their lives. We continue to work with our BC counterparts. They have provided amendments to their proposals, and we are working together to face the public consumption issues.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I speak to residents in my community, and the minister isn't listening to British Columbians. She didn't listen to BC mayors who wanted to stop open drug use in their community a year ago. She's not listening to BC parents horrified to find crack pipes and needles near schools and playgrounds. A student project from a school in my community had students writing to me about issues important to them. Unbelievably, crime and open drug use was the #1 issue. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Why won't these Liberals be honest with Canadians and just end their radical drug policy?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives aren't genuine with Canadians about their care or concern for those who are dying from the toxic drug supply. The opposition leader talks a big talk about investing in treatment, but Conservatives cut 2/3 of their drug treatment fund when they were in power, Mr. Speaker. They only focus on treatment and recovery. They don't focus on safe consumption sites. They don't focus on harm reduction as health care. Mr. Speaker, we need to partner with everyone. When will they listen?
The honourable member from Mission Massey Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal minister responsible for legal hard drugs is misleading Canadians. Drug overdoses are now the leading cause of death among youth aged 10 to 18 in British Columbia.
Shameful.
Just yesterday, she said she was waiting on more information from the BC NDP government, which the province said they delivered within hours. How much more information does she need to end their radical and extremist policy, which is putting the children of British Columbia at risk?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, I have been in touch with the province of BC. BC requested the pilot project, and I was in touch this week with the Premier of BC. He and his government have serious concerns about the pilot project. We share those concerns, and we are working together with BC to address them. But I do want to say, making political hay out of the pain of suffering Canadian families is simply irresponsible.
The Honourable Member for Mission Mashpee Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, this government is supposed to be in the business of protecting children, not killing them with exposure and access to hard drugs. The RCMP has confirmed that legal hard drugs are being sold on the black market. In Abbotsford, the Soccer Association has to regularly sweep the needles for pitch. The Legion and many businesses in Mission have to deal with crack smoke every day. When will this government do the right thing and cancel their ideologically extreme experiment to legalize hard drugs and start protecting BC's children?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as a mother of 3, including teenagers, I care so much about Canada and Canadians, and I agree, opioid addiction is a tragedy. It is a public health tragedy, and it is a public safety tragedy. But let me tell you what is putting the public safety of all Canadians at risk. Consorting with white supremacists and misogynists. That is a public safety risk. The Conservatives have an opportunity today to disavow that. They should do it.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Yesterday, the National Assembly adopted a historic unanimous motion. It, and I quote, denounces the refusal of the New Democratic, the Conservative and the Liberal parties of Canada to recognise the principle of respect for Quebec's areas of jurisdiction and to grant Quebec the right to opt out with full compensation. This is the very first time that the National Assembly of Quebec has unanimously blamed each and every Federalist party by name because they're all working against Quebec. When the government says it is working hand in hand with Quebec, are they working hand in hand rather with these parties against Quebec? The Honourable Minister for Transport. Mr. Speaker, going against the Bloc Québécois isn't going against Quebec because we are working with Quebec on housing, on seniors, on young people, on childcare, so that kids can go to work with their stomachs full. But the Bloc Québécois is always against all of this. They do the opposite of what we promise for Quebecers. We're trying to fight for seniors. We're trying to fight against climate change, and they always vote against. So shame on them, Mr. Speaker. Before the member for Joliette has the floor, I would like to encourage members in this House to not interrupt the person who has the floor. And I hope that this will be applicable as well for when the Honourable Member for Joliette takes the floor, which is now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's historic, this unanimous motion. Canada's Liberals have been denounced by their Liberal allies in Quebec. The NDP was denounced by Québec Solidaire. The Conservatives, well, they weren't denounced by their ally, Éric Duhem, well, because he has no MPs, and Quebecers don't vote Conservative. But they too were condemned by the unanimous National Assembly of other stripes. All the elected representatives in Quebec City can see that all the Federalist elected representatives in Ottawa are working to undermine Quebec's ability to make their own social choices, or societal choices rather. Does the government realise the precedent it has set? The Honourable Minister for Transport. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives do have an ally. It's the Bloc Québécois. It's the Bloc Québécois, Mr. Speaker. They always seem to vote together. There's a bit of malaise in that corner. When one makes a promise and one does the opposite, then promises are shattered, promises for those who trusted them and voted for them. They say they want to fight for seniors, they say they want to fight for the environment, but they always vote against. Why? Because they just simply follow the Conservative playbook. The Honourable Member for Joliette. The federal government in this budget wants to tell Quebecers how to run Quebec. Whether it's in healthcare, housing or any other area, Liberal Conservative NDPs, by refusing to amend the budget, the three parties have eminently shown that they want to become the puppet masters of Quebec. However, yesterday's unanimous response from the National Assembly was clear. We, Quebecers, still want to be masters in our own homes. Does the Minister for Finance see that Quebecers do not accept that elected representatives of the neighbouring nation should decide Quebecers' priorities instead of Quebecers? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in my riding, a number of our priorities is to have access to quality and affordable dental care. And big news, since yesterday, thousands of people in my riding and throughout Quebec now have access to dental care. Affordable and quality dental care. This is huge news for all Canadians, and it's great news for all Quebecers as well.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
The Liberal government's dangerous drug policy in BC allows people to smoke crack on a public bus, to shoot up next to a park with people with children playing there, to blow smoke from meth in the face of a nurse in a hospital. Now we learn what the Liberals want to do to Toronto, what they've done to BC. The Leader of the Opposition sent the Prime Minister a letter asking him to reject Toronto's request. Are the nurses in Toronto getting people who smoke meth in hospital rooms, or will they finally reject the request?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are completely committed to working with communities across this country in facing the opioid crisis and the tragedies that are happening to so many families. Every request is reviewed on a case-by-case basis. The member should know this. Toronto Public Health has not submitted a proposal that adequately addresses the dual objectives of public health and public safety, which have guided us throughout addressing the opioid crisis. Every level of government, including the province, must be engaged in this process, and we continue to work together.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Speaker, their plan is killing 22 Canadians every day, and opioid deaths have doubled in this country in just 2 years. I can't believe that the Minister from Toronto wants to expand this lawlessness into her own city. Otherwise, she would just say no. I'll give her an opportunity to just say that. One more opportunity to stop this extremist experiment on the streets of Toronto. Yes or no? Will you reject it?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a minister, I'm a Toronto MP, I'm a Toronto mother. I know, as everyone in this House should, that the opioid crisis is a tragedy, and there are no families in Canada that are untouched by it. The BC pilot project was requested by BC. BC has serious concerns. We share those concerns. We are addressing it. There is no other pilot project anywhere in Canada, and the BC experience should and will be instructive.
The Honourable Member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 24 hours since the Leader of the Opposition sent the Prime Minister a letter asking him to reject Toronto City Hall's request to legalize hard drugs. And we're getting no serious answers from this NDP Liberal government. After seeing death and disorder in BC, why can't the Prime Minister take the no-brainer and say no? At what time today can we expect an answer to Toronto City Hall?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I think the members opposite were not listening to my previous answer. The only pilot project in Canada is in BC. BC has serious concerns. We share them, and we're acting urgently together to resolve them. There are no other pilot projects anywhere in Canada. I think all Canadians are aware of the BC experience and need to take it into account. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? We've invested $200 billion in the healthcare system. They voted against it.
Yes.
The honourable member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
People in Port Moody, Coquitlam are struggling to keep up with the skyrocketing rents and grocery prices. Meanwhile, the Conservative leader is schmoozing with Canada's wealthiest at a $3,500 a year wine club. This is the guy who said he'd cut dental care and pharmacare in favor of keeping billion-dollar corporate handouts. And the Liberals are no better. They're letting big grocery CEOs rack up obscene profits while Canadians go hungry. When will the Liberals stop this corporate greed?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, in the recent federal budget, we put forward a plan to establish fairness for every generation that's going to ask the wealthiest to pay a little bit more so we can fund the things that really matter to the people who've been struggling the last couple of years. We've got plans that are going to reduce the cost of living by reducing the cost of housing, by solving the housing crisis. We've got a plan to launch a national school food program to make sure that hungry kids can put food on the table. And as I give this answer, the Conservatives jeer because they do not support the measures that are going to help vulnerable people in this country. We will stand up for the middle class. We will stand up for the vulnerable. It's a shame the Conservatives won't join us.
The honourable member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, while rich CEOs make record profits, families in Nanaimo Ladysmith can barely put food on the table. And what's the Conservative leader doing about it? Well, he's hosting a fundraiser with Canada's richest elites that cost thousands just to step through the door. It's no wonder when he was in power, the biggest corporations got $60 billion in handouts while gutting services to British Columbians. And the Liberals, they maintain these handouts. Will the government end these corporate giveaways?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I would agree with my colleague that it's disturbing to see the leader of the opposition siding with big corporate at a time where, Mr. Speaker, all Canadians should be united to put pressure on the grocery in this country, Mr. Speaker. If they are really honest about caring for Canadians on the other side, Mr. Speaker, let them speak up. Let them tell to Loblaws and Walmart to adopt the grocery code of conduct in this country, Mr. Speaker. If we speak with one voice, we're going to improve the lives of Canadians. Are they going to do it?
The honourable member from Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, Halifax is home to thousands of researchers with limitless potential, and it's essential to provide the support necessary to fully unleash that potential. Halifax researchers are making advancements in ocean science, brain repair, lithium-ion battery technology, pediatrics, and so much more. Their work contributes to the economic and social prosperity of Canada and improves the lives of all Canadians. Could the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry please tell us how Budget 2024 will support research and researchers in Halifax and across Canada?
You're here.
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, what a great question from a great member, Mr. Speaker. This is a colleague which has been advocating for research and science in this country, Mr. Speaker. Canada researchers and students are our greatest resource in this country. Researchers at Dalhousie, Mr. Speaker, are pushing the boundaries of brain health, big data, and ocean research. In Budget 2024, we invested $3.4 billion in our world-leading talent, Mr. Speaker. Students will see an increase in their stipends to support their research and attract the best and brightest. Mr. Speaker, the science of today is the economy of tomorrow. Let's invest in our futures together.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, interest on the debt is skyrocketing and will continue to do so while spending remains out of control. And the Bloc continues to support these Liberal centralizing policies that are driving up the cost of living. For example, on December 13th, the Bloc voted for over $20 billion in budgetary items. When will the Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, stop wasting money so that Quebecers can start enjoying a decent life again? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to finally have a question on the economy, because this gives me the opportunity to share some good news from the Governor of the Bank of Canada. He said today that we have gone through a long road in the fight against inflation, and recent progress is encouraging. The message to Canadians is the following: we are getting close to the goal. This is good news thanks to the work of Canadians. Thank you for the opportunity. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I'll remind the Minister of Finance that 48% of Liberal supporters finds that their government is not managing public finances well. That was in a recent Léger poll. Even worse, there's the Bloc, which pretends to be critical and to defend Quebec's interests. They voted for $500 billion in additional budget items. It's really, really, really expensive to vote for the Bloc, the party that supports this financial disaster. When will the Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, stop their out-of-control spending and give Quebecers some respite? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our colleague is talking about poor management. Mr. Speaker, have you already heard that during the whole term of the Conservative leader when he was Minister of Housing, he built six affordable housing units throughout the country? In the writing of my colleague over the past few months, I have an updated number. There are 222 affordable housing units that have been built in just his writing. 6 during the whole term of the Conservative leader as Housing Minister. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if I'm speaking to the Professor of the Université de Laval or the Procurement Minister. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, the cost of living has never been higher. People are being squeezed. Mortgages, housing, food, everything is more expensive. This Liberal government isn't worth the cost, and neither is the Bloc Québécois. Just a reminder, it was the Bloc that voted for $500 billion in budgetary items. We're talking about $500 billion in centralizing and inflationary spending that has been supported by the Bloc Québécois. When will this Prime Minister stop its waste so that Quebecers can skip the food banks and regain their dignity? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, once again, a good opportunity to talk about the economy. First, we have a responsible policy fiscally. We have a AAA credit rating, the highest possible, and I'll refer to the Bank of Canada's governor who's talked about the good progress on inflation. But the Conservatives, their only policy is austerity and cut. They want to cut daycares, cut school food programs, and cut Radio-Canada CBC, which is so important for Quebecers. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Liselet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of budgetary chaos, this government, supported by the Bloc, continues with its inflationary spending. They are throwing money out the window. The Bloc talks about the importance of health transfers, but they voted for $500 billion in centralizing spending, which has more interest costs than the money that goes to health transfers. The more this government spends, the more the Bloc supports it. When will the Prime Minister stop wasting taxpayer money? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, Canadians who are listening today understand that they have a choice. On one side of the House, Mr. Speaker, they hear the voice of a party that has no ambition, no vision, no plan for the future. On this side of the House, what people understand is that they have a Liberal government, a government that has a vision for the future, a government that has a plan for the coming generations, a government that has ambition for our country, Mr. Speaker. What I tell Canadians is listen to what you're hearing. You'll see that on this side of the House, we will fight for you every day. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. We've learned that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions rose between 2021 and 2022. They're going up when they should be going down. But what's most catastrophic is that they're going to keep skyrocketing because Ottawa opened Trans Mountain yesterday. The Minister of the Environment has just turned on the dirty oil tap. Another 600,000 barrels every day are piped out of the oil sands for export. Can the Minister of the Environment explain to us how his new dirty oil pipeline will help us lower emissions? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question and remind him that greenhouse gas emissions are 44 million tons lower in 2024 than they were before the pandemic. That's the equivalent of 13 million vehicles taken off our roads. Greenhouse gas emissions have never been as low in Canada in 25 years. So that's when Conor McGregor was born. So things are going very well, but I agree with my colleague, there's much work to be done still. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Greenpeace told Radio-Canada, CBC, that the missing link in the federal climate plan is a cap on emissions from the oil sector. The minister must be relieved that there's no ceiling on emissions because he would have banged his head on it with the Trans Mountain emissions. It's a reminder that Canada is the fourth largest petromonarchy in the world. With Trans Mountain, it consolidates its fourth place between Russia and Iraq at the top of the worst polluters. We know that the minister never dreamed of being a petromonarch. So will he ever put a limit on his country's greed for black gold? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague mentioned Greenpeace. Greenpeace in that same interview recognized that we are making progress in Canada and that this year's record is very encouraging, but that more needs to be done. I'd like to remind my colleague that there's one country in the G20 that has put an end to fossil fuel subsidies, and that is Canada. We've committed to going even further by eliminating public funding, which no other country in the world has committed to doing, and the cap on greenhouse gas emissions is coming. We're the only major oil producer in the world to have proposed putting a cap on those emissions, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the Bloc and the Prime Minister are not worth the cost. The Bloc has always voted with the Liberals on government budgets. We're talking about $500 billion in centralizing and inflationary spending, and that hurts. This spending increases the cost of living and keeps interest rates high. With the Bloc, Quebecers are going hungry. They're having trouble housing themselves, and they are hurting. Mr. Speaker, when will this Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, stop wasting money so that Quebecers can once again afford decent housing and food? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I am really pleased to have another opportunity to refer to the Governor of the Bank of Canada, who shared very good news today with Canadians. He said, the message to Canadians is the following: we are getting closer to the goal. He's also said that it's our government's fiscal responsibility that has allowed him to stabilize inflation, and that will allow us to reduce the overnight rate.
From Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Island, and Rideau Lakes.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, the employment minister has been caught in shady lobbying, and we can see that this Prime Minister and his government certainly aren't worth the cost or the corruption. The minister was caught cashing checks from a lobbying firm that was lobbying his own government, his own ministry. How much taxpayer cash did this minister and his company shove in their pockets? How much? How much? How much?
The Honourable Government House Leader. Order. Order. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, the minister has always followed the very strict ethics rules that apply to him as an elected official. Canada has one of the strictest ethics regimes in the world for elected officials, and that is exactly what Canadians expect. The minister has always conducted himself in an ethical manner that follows the spirit and letter of those rules.
That's right. Good answer.
The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, we know that the fish rots from the head down. And this Prime Minister twice found guilty of breaking ethics laws, along with multiple members of his front bench and his back bench. We know that the minister tried to hide that he was getting money from his company that was lobbying his own government, even his own ministry, but he got caught. Global News reported it, and now we're asking him about it. So instead of having the government House leader protect him from his own accountability, his own actions, will he stand up today and tell us how much money he took?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I just gave that answer. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes. Oh, I'm sorry. We only. Well, I never knew I was so popular on this side. The Honourable Member from Dorval,
The Honourable Member for Dorval, Lachine-LaSalle. Mr. Speaker, as we approach Red Dress Day, which raises awareness of the alarming rates of violence,
Join calls for the introduction of a red dress alert system. This system would be crucial in promptly informing the public whenever an Indigenous woman, girl, or two-spirited person goes missing. Can the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations share with us what measures are being taken to address this critical issue? Thank you so much.
The Honourable Minister for Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize the advocates, families, and survivors working tirelessly to press our government for urgent action. That includes the member from Winnipeg Centre and the member from Oakville, North Burlington. Folks like Sandra DeLorme, Hilda Anderson-Pierce, Leslie Varley, Angela McDougall, Gladys Raddick, Lorna Brown, and Denise Halfyard, who are advancing the implementation of a red dress alert system. Their efforts are crucial in bringing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people home safely. And I thank the member from Dorval, Lachine-LaSalle for our advocacy leveraging the $1.3 million in Budget 2024. Our government will put an end.
The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Speaker, the sole Liberal minister from Alberta is at the centre of two corruption scandals. It has been reported that the minister is tied to a lobbyist who received a staggering $110 million in federal contracts, and the minister is the director of a company that received a further $8 million of government contracts and is engulfed in allegations of fraud and wire fraud. So, how much money did this minister and his companies receive from these shady contracts?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier in response to our other honourable friend, the minister has always followed the strict ethics rules that apply to him as an elected official. Canada has one of the strictest ethics regimes in the world for elected officials, and that is exactly what Canadians expect. The minister has always conducted himself in an ethical manner that follows the spirit and letter of those rules.
That's right.
The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Speaker, the minister has been on the take with taxpayers' money. The minister retains a 50% stake in a company that is engulfed in allegations of fraud, and the minister continues to receive payments from the lobbying firm that received $110 million in federal contracts. So will the minister finally have the guts to stand in his place and tell Canadians how much he pocketed off taxpayers?
I will come back to this matter later, but I do warn members, please, to be very careful about what they say about other honourable members. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in this House, all members are entitled to be treated by other members with a presumption of being honourable. That is not what this member has just done. I would invite him to carefully consider the words that he just employed while doing a speech into a television camera, one that he would never ever do were we outside this chamber, and I would invite that member to be very, very careful with his words in the future.
The honourable member from Brantford Brant.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, yet another Liberal minister is embroiled in an ethics scandal. This employment minister continued to serve as a director of a company that secured over $8 million in government contracts, and his former lobbying firm got direct access to the Prime Minister's office and the Finance Minister's office, everyone who has their hands on the purse strings. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost or the corruption. Simple question. How much did this minister or his companies receive since he's been in cabinet?
Oh, hear, hear. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I've answered that question, and I would once again invite members from all sides of this House to be very, very careful with the words that they utter.
The honourable member from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Size Country.
Mr. Speaker, Budget 2024 proposes funding for Canada's first ever action plan on combating hate, which will support community outreach, law enforcement reform, tackle the rise in hate crimes, enhance community security, counter radicalization, and increase support for victims. This plan was drafted way before Canadians realized that the leader of the official opposition was cozying up with white nationalists. Can the minister please tell this House what impacts far-right extremism has on our community?
The Honourable Minister for Diversity.
Mr. Speaker, combating hate is a responsibility of everyone in this House. Anything otherwise is shameful and frankly appalling. When the Leader of the Opposition decided to cozy up to far-right extremist supporters, it is unbecoming of any elected official, much less the leader of the major political party.
That's what you're doing.
When the honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton, was asking his question, it was reckoned by the chair was quite happy to make sure that the honourable member had a free time to be able to ask his question. I'd ask the honourable member, please, to hold back his comments while the minister is answering. The Honourable Minister for Diversity from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition decided to cozy up to far-right extremist supporters, it is unbecoming of any elected official, much less the leader of a major Canadian political party. Canadians expect their leaders to stand up for Canadian values. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we're investing $270 million in the budget for Canada's first ever action plan on combating hate. Mr. Speaker, that's leadership.
The honourable member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, 10,000 Canadian rail workers voted to strike because, in part, Canada's two largest railway companies want to undermine key safety measures in their collective agreements. The safety of rail workers, the safety of rail communities, and the safety of our environment are all at stake. Will the minister ensure the parties remain at the bargaining table until a fair, safe, and equitable agreement is reached?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Labour.
Question. What is happening right now is a cooling off period is a normal part of the collective bargaining process. Our facilitators and conciliators remain closely with both parties at the table. We remain committed on this side, as I know the honourable member is, to making sure that the table remains, the best deals are made at the table. Thank you very much for the question.
The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, even for the Liberals, this is really something. It's a hat trick. 3 times, 3 different platform promises broken in one omnibus budget bill. First up, they broke the commitment to have UNDRIP honoured and to consult with Indigenous people. Second, they used an omnibus budget bill to change environmental legislation. Third, Third, once again, they failed to fix the Environmental Assessment Act. Let's make it simple. Environmental assessment under Mulroney's law worked. Harper repealed it. It still doesn't work. This draft in this Ways and Means bill will go down to defeat at the Supreme Court. Once again, fix it once and for all and use the environmental expert panel to guide your action.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for her question. As per the Supreme Court asked us to do, we have brought changes to the Impact Assessment Act of Canada to ensure that the federal government would do what the federal government is supposed to be doing while provinces do their part in impact assessment. And we're confident that this will help us to move forward. And I would remind my honourable colleague that at the time that this bill was adopted, C-69, we did not have clean fuel standards. We did not have zero emission